This is Tim Derling on the phone with me. It's a very, very much a pleasure to speak with one of the legendary voices of classic rock, the original singer for Foreigner, the man behind tons of classic hits, Mr. Lou Gramm. Hello, Lou. How are you?
Good, Jim. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. We're very excited to have you coming to our neck of the woods October 5th as part of Rocktoberfest, playing the Northern Carleton Civic Center in Perth Andover. I'll give everybody out there information on how they can get tickets. Thank you so much for taking a little bit of time. I'm sure it's your busy schedule to talk to us today, Lou.
It's my pleasure.
Got a few questions here I'd like to ask you, but first of all, since this is fairly recent news, I have to congratulate you on your recent nomination into the Songwriters Hall of Fame.
Thank you. It was a wonderful event, and it's an incredible honor.
You're in some fine company: Elton John, Bernie Taupin, Steven Tyler, Joe Perry, and of course, you're nominated along with your former Foreigner bandmate Mick Jones.
Yep.
And I saw some clips of the performance. You performed, if I'm not mistaken, you did the Jukebox Hero and I Want to Know What Love Is.
That's correct.
Two of the many songs that you will forever be identified for. Lou, songwriting, being awarded for songwriting, with so many talent shows now like The Voice and American Idol and X Factor, they push the vocal talent and the presence, stage presence, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of emphasis on artists actually performing their own material. What are your thoughts about that? Is songwriting a lost art, or do they just leave it to a certain few people that everybody does their songs, or how do you feel about that?
Well, I certainly, being brought up on the Beatles and that whole first British wave, it seemed like many of the bands wrote their own songs, including the Stones. Even though they covered old rock standards, they were writing their own songs and had big hits with their own things, And the Beatles were my champions in that manner, because they practically wrote everything themselves, with the exception of a few old songs that they covered. And it's always been my desire, from the time I first saw the Beatles and then the Stones on Ed Sullivan, and I was already playing drums. It had always been my desire to be in a band that played all its own music and won the hearts of the fans from things that they've written and performed.
Their own words, your own thoughts.
Yes.
Yeah, because nowadays it's like they feed them the songs to sing and they sing them. And there's always been, there's always been pop artists like that. But
back in the 50s they had that. I think it was called Songwriters Row, where Carole King and Bernie Goffin and all those writers used to write and then feed songs to Bobby Darin and Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello and just the whole slew of people that dominated the charts in that era.
The Beatles and the Stones, obviously I wasn't around in that era, but it seems to me that they kind of changed things because they showed young musicians that it's possible to pick up a guitar or drums or a microphone and write and play your own material. Is that just about right? They weren't being fed songs. There's like, no, we have our own ideas.
Yes, absolutely. And I think they started showing the record labels that you don't need Songwriters Row and other people to stuff material down your throat. That if certain bands are the complete package. They not only are good writers but good performers as well.
Yeah. You mentioned being a drummer. I was going to ask you about that. With a background in drumming, does that affect the way that you sing and or write? Do you tend to think more rhythmically? Does that have anything to do with your songwriting or vocal style?
It certainly does. When I write, I do think rhythm first, and then melody, and then the chords come later. When I switched from drums to becoming a lead singer, it immediately affected me because I was totally tuned in the way I phrased my lyrics around the beat.
So you always was?
I certainly did.
Yeah. Let's see. What do I ask
and
about
could
next?
play around with it.
Yeah, there is such a thing as singing ahead of the beat or behind the beat, but you always knew where the focus was.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Getting back into the songwriting thing, Lou. I mean, obviously, you've been the voice and the writer behind tons of classic songs on your own and with Foreigner. But of all the songs that were released, we'll just limit it to Foreigner for this part of the question. But is there a song? I guess it's a two-part question. Is there a song that you wish had been a bigger hit that you thought was just going to break completely through and it didn't quite get there? And because for me, there's a couple of songs that Foreigner have that were minor hits, but I thought should have been much bigger. One comes to mind is "Break It Up" from the Four album.
That's the first one that comes to my mind.
Is that right? I love that song. And
it's a fantastic song, and I think the reason why it was only a minor hit was because it was, I think, it was the third single on an album, and after a couple big singles, the record companies for some reason don't push anymore.
Yeah, that's a different story. Yeah, it's a shame because I mean, obviously you're referring to that was the Four album, so Urgent and Waiting for a Girl Like You both were monster hits. But
yes,
Break It Up,
exactly right.
I think Break It Up stalled somewhere in the mid-20s. And to me, when I remember hearing that and thinking, the first time I heard the Four album, which is many years later, I'm a little bit younger, but I remember thinking, why haven't I heard this song before? This sounds like something I should have heard. It's a great song. And
I agree with you, and the whole band was very disappointed, and Mick and I had meetings with Atlantic Records and called them out on dropping the ball.
It could have gone a lot further. There's another song that almost hit the top 40, and it was actually from the last Foreigner album that you recorded with the band, Mr. Moonlight. It's the song "Until the End of Time." I thought was a really classic Foreigner ballad that should have gone further than it did.
I think so too. But you know what? In that instance, we were with a small, independent West Coast label, and we were told that they had a powerful marketing department and promotion department, and sadly enough, they had a very sparse promotion and marketing department, and called in a few independents to help out. And fortunately, we got as far as we got, but they didn't have the stuff to push it into the top 10.
No, it really, back in the music business, I think is completely different now. But back then, you still needed the power of a major label to. But it really, it did get some airplay, so it did quite well considering. I thought that last album was great. It had "Under the Gun" on there and had some really great material. But
White Lie.
Yeah. Running the Risk. It had some good songs on there for sure.
I think so too. It's one of, other than Foreigner 4, it's my favorite Foreigner album.
Cool. And back into the Foreigner albums, I wanted to ask you, and Break It Up alludes to this. If anyone knows that song, if I'm not mistaken, I can hear some very distinctive background vocals on that, which I'm pretty sure is the producer, Mutt Lange. Am I correct in saying that?
He was in there, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He definitely can sing, and he liked to sneak in there for certain parts. He's all over the album, to tell you the truth.
Of all the producers you've worked with on your own and with Foreigner, you've worked with some big names, obviously Mutt Lange, Keith Olsen, Roy Thomas Baker. Who was your favorite? Who do you think brought the most or made the best sounding album?
I think Mutt Lange, for sure.
So you worked with him fairly early on. He wasn't quite the mega producer he ended up becoming with. He'd come off the back end of AC/DC. Don't think he'd worked with Def Leppard at that point, and Shania Twain was several years down the road, and Bryan Adams. But
actually, he had done one Def Leppard album already.
He'd done High and Dry. That's right.
Yeah,
Forgot about that.
And helped to breathe a lot of life into them, and they were waiting for him to get busy with their second album with him. And of course, we told him how long we would be, and ran over by more than a few weeks. And finally, when the final mix came, he couldn't be there.
That I've read that a lot about Mutt Lange. He's a perfectionist and tends to run over time. And of course,
Yep.
a few
And
weeks is one thing, but I think Def Leppard they took it like 4 years, 3 years, 4
yeah.
years.
Well, I mean, the thing was, he of course, Mutt being the co-producer with Mick, wanted to make sure that he was involved in the mixes, but we had ran over so far that he was on the edge of losing his production chores with Def Leppard, and so he left the mixing to Mick and I.
Well, it's a fine-sounding album, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it is the biggest-selling Foreigner album, is it not?
By far.
That's the one that, if a person had one Foreigner album, it was the Four album.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. So as far as besides songs being "Wish That You'd Been been a bigger hit," what's the song that you're most proud of in your career, either as an artist or a writer or both? Is there one that stands out?
I think Jukebox Hero.
That's one of those songs that as soon as it comes on, you just never get tired of hearing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Funny enough, that was the last single released on Four, and I think that was a strategic error on the record company's part, because it was the number one AOR cut for months and months and months, and by the time Atlantic released it as a single, it didn't have any legs.
So, yeah, we're talking back in an era where there was AOR radio and CHR radio, and there's a difference between the rock charts and the pop charts. So what you're saying is that it already had its run on the rock charts by the time they released it as a pop single? Is that what I'm getting from that?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, well, it still gets plenty of play nowadays, but yeah, as far as chart placement, I think
it only went up into the 30s.
It's one of those songs, and there was a few songs like that from that era that are known by most, even casual music fans. But if you actually go and look at the Billboard placing, they actually didn't place that high. It's something, there's a strength in the song, and probably it's been used in movies and TV and commercials and things like that. That probably helped give it some of its longevity as well.
You could also tell by how frequently it was played.
Yes, and it's one of those songs that as soon as you go into it, I'm sure as soon as you hit that first note live, everybody knows what it is and reacts.
Oh, yeah. The lights dim, that bass part, bass synth, and everybody's like, ooh.
Yeah, it's always a crowd pleaser. I want to ask you about a couple of things, Lou. I know you've been asked to death about your health issues, so I won't get into that. But I saw you play with Foreigner in Moncton in 1998, and then I saw you again with your own band in Woodstock in 2006, and the difference was striking. Your voice was much, much stronger in 2006, and I'm curious, is that something that you work on constantly, or do you just grab the mic and go?
No, I have a specific regiment that I use to warm up my voice, and it's scales, and I do that. I start doing that about 20 minutes before we go on stage, and by the time I take the stage, I feel as if I've already sung twice. That I go on the stage hitting stride. And I like doing that rather than wasting the first 2 or 3 songs warming up,
Right.
I had my operation, I believe, in March of '97, and I was so medicated that my doctors told me I had no business being on the road. And 5 months after the operation, we were playing Japan and Southeast Asia.
Wow.
Against doctor's orders.
Was that a decision that you were okay with, or was that contractual, or how did?
It was contractual, because what happened was it hang on, somebody's at my door.
Sure.
Can we pause a second?
Sure, no problem.
There goes my dog. Hang on just a second.
No problem, Lou.
Sorry, I think that's taken care of.
No problem
so
at all.
Let's get back to it. What was the question?
You were talking about being on tour and your operation.
So I was out against doctor's orders, and I couldn't remember the words to the songs from any of the albums, and my equilibrium was off. I was a medicated mess, and you know, when I used to set foot on stage, the audience, I could tell that the audience would go, "Ooh," you know, they were just shocked to see a bloated, medicated, unsteady guy, and I really was feeling self-conscious and wasn't singing good. I had to glance down all the time at the words to songs that I had been singing for 15, 20 years because I wasn't sure of the words anymore, you know. And that process, you know, obviously got better as I was weaned off them but I didn't even start feeling like myself until almost 2006.
Well, it was a solid performance. One of the things I remember about that is that you did one of my favorite songs that your solo created, "Heartache." Is that still in the set?
No, it's not. I love that song.
No, that song that's one of the, I don't know, I just really dig that song.
Yeah.
In this day and age of iTunes and digital people buying music digitally, Lou, there's something that's missed, I think, and it has something to do with the enjoying an album in its entirety from start to finish and the running order of albums.
Nobody considers that anymore.
No, like the first track on the album or the first track on side 2 or the closing song. And
the closing song of side 1 that makes you turn it over to side 2.
Yeah, like something that just keeps you wanting more. It's all about singles now. I mean, that's nothing new. That was like that in the 50s and I think into the 60s, and we alluded to that. I think the Beatles and Stones kind of changed that. They kind of made people want to buy albums rather than just 45s. But the other thing that I miss about iTunes, and I miss it about CDs versus vinyl, is the album art. You could do so many fun things. Like in your case, I know, like Double Vision, I've seen 2 different covers for that album.
Yeah, the green and the blue.
Yeah, and on the cover of Head Games, if you look close, there's song titles written here and there. So little things like that, you lose them. You lose them on a CD, but you really lose them on iTunes with a little postage stamp size.
Yes,
it must be frustrating for art directors, and they must just.
I mean, there's almost no point to them anymore.
No, it's just here's your song, or here's
when they used to hold an incredibly important job.
Yeah, people would be known. Art directors would be known by name for their. You know, I want the guy that designed this album. I want the guy that did this cover.
That's
or
right.
Whatnot. But it's.
But the reality is, there is almost no need for a record company.
That's very true with the internet and being able to self-promote. Although I have heard musicians say that it's a lot harder in some cases because you don't have the tour support, you don't have the push in radio, unless you're already, like yourself, an established name and people know right off the top of their head. They could easily think of several songs, and to be able to go and see you live. Who is currently in your band, Lou?
My brother Ben on drums, Michael Sterto on guitar, Andy Knoll on keyboards, A.D. Zimmer on bass. Is
this lineup been stable for a number of years, or?
It's been stable for about 3 years.
Okay. And you played with your brother on and off for quite a long time, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Getting back to the music business, my understanding is that Foreigner's demo tape, I know you'd already had some recording experience with Black Sheep. You were on Chrysalis Records and
Capitol Records in the U.S. for 2 albums.
And Capitol, yeah. But with Foreigner, I have read that the Foreigner demo tape was rejected by several record labels, and it was almost sort of accidentally discovered by a man named John David Kolodner, who's a well-known A&R man. And it just was kind of a fluke, and he heard it, and I think the song he heard was the demo of Feels Like the First Time, and he called the president of Atlantic and said, I think you got a band on here that's got a #1 hit. And what advice would you have now, where things are so different, for aspiring musicians, Lou? What would you tell them if they've got a dream, if they want to go for it? What would you tell them?
First off, let me tell you that we had about 7 or 8 record labels come down to our studio rehearsal room, and we played those songs live for those people, and each one of them said they liked it very much, but they passed. And then John Kolodner came down with the president of Atlantic Records, and we played for him, and they passed. And then John came back and said, your song ideas are great, but you need to condense them a little bit for singles. They run on a little bit too long, you know, and helped us shorten the ideas up to very palatable hit radio singles. And then we called back the president of Atlantic again and played him the songs again, and we signed.
Okay, so that's how it went. And John Kolodner, for those that are curious, of a younger generation, he had a lot to do with Aerosmith's company records, and he appears in a number of their videos. He's got a long beard, and yeah, he
was the head of A&R.
Yeah,
that's artist relations.
Is that kind of another lost art these days, Lou? Like with A&R guys?
I think so, because they kind of they would oversee the writing process, the recording process, send reports to the president of the label, make suggestions that would help the record sell without compromising the artistic end of it. It was a fairly thankless job.
And you're basically only as good as your last success story.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens a lot, and there's only a few that were able to do it consistently, discover one act and then another act. And of course, in the beginning, it's interesting that you mentioned that your songs, he suggested that you shorten your songs up. Foreigner not only was a big band musically, it was a 6-piece band. You were extremely all very capable. And was it, did you kind of bristle at the idea of shortening your songs, or did you go along with it and thinking, well, this is the essence of the song, so what if it's 3.5 minutes as opposed to 5 minutes, or how did that?
Well, no. I remember when I would buy my Beatles singles that they were all under 3 minutes, and that didn't go unnoticed to me. By the time I was in Black Sheep, I knew that a good single had to be under 3 minutes, because at about 2:55 they start fading it.
So you had to condense
DJs
it. And,
did.
Yeah.
So I knew about that, and when John, I always thought that the Foreigner songs were a little long, and we were under the understanding that when we recorded it, we would do an album version that could be a little longer, and a single version that would be a little more concise.
So the same song, only AM versus FM, basically?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so AM would play
a lot of our singles were the endings were shortened, or we'd cut the guitar solo in half so we can come back with the final chorus. We would do our own single edits, and it was fun.
So you had complete control. You didn't hear it on the radio and wonder what they did with the whole last verse or the second.
We wouldn't allow them to do it. They would and could do it if you didn't. But when the album came out and the first single, we would present them with the edited, concise single version that was an acceptable time to them.
That's interesting, because not only did you make sure it came out exactly the way you wanted it, but you also saved them. And there's no way they chances are they wouldn't object to that, because you just saved them the work of doing it themselves.
Yeah, and chances are if they did it, we'd hear it, and then we wouldn't like it.
No, it wouldn't be the way that you would ask for it. I got to ask you this question, Lou. A good friend of mine is a huge fan of the Lost Boys soundtrack, and you play a part in that with the song "Lost in the Shadows." How did you end up recording that song for that particular soundtrack?
I was put in touch with those people through my publishing company, and they asked for me to write a song, not only for the album but basically the title song, And I already had a couple music ideas. We were asked this exactly when we were in the middle of writing and recording our first album. So we took one of the ideas that kind of weren't complete enough to make the album, and aimed it theme-wise towards being the title track of Lost Boys. And right while we were cutting our first album, we cut that song too, and they loved it. And then they came to New York as we were finishing our album, and we did the video on a soundstage in New York City. And Kiefer was there, and the director was there. I'm trying to think of his name.
I should know it too. It just escapes me right now.
Yeah, he's very, very well known. I just can't think of it right now. Joel Schumacher.
That's right. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. It was a very cool video, and that was the age of not only the big movies, but the big soundtracks and the songs to go with it, and it fit right in with the time.
That had a big budget. I know. I mean, I'm glad that wasn't on my shoulders. They absorbed it for the sake of the movie.
Yeah. Well, Lou, I'm just trying to think. It's very generous of you to take the time out to speak to us. I guess that was all the questions that I had written down.
I think we covered a lot.
I think so. What can, as far as fans, if they've never seen you live with your band, we're talking about playing October 5th for Oktoberfest at the Northern Carlton Civic Center in Perth Andover, the Lou Gramm Band. And what kind of a mix are they, if they've never seen you live before, Lou, of Foreigner, your solo work? How does what's a typical set list for you consist of?
I think basically it's a full out greatest hits of Foreigner mixed in is the hits from my solo album. It's a real classic cross section, and there's very few songs that we leave out.
So basically, they're not going to be disappointed, and your band is fantastic. I saw them in 2006, and you all deliver a fine show live, Lou. Have you got any recording plans currently?
We're actually right in the midst of putting song ideas together. So I would say by maybe the end of the year we should start recording and shoot for a spring release.
What's the easiest way for fans to keep in touch with the recording plans and what you're doing, where you're touring? What's your website, Lou?
The website is www.lougramm.com.
lougramm.com, nice and simple. Okay.
Yep.
So, Lou Gramm live in concert, Rocktoberfest, October 5th in Perth Andover at the Northern Carlton Civic Center. Lou, thank you very much for taking a little time to speak to us this afternoon. Really appreciate it. And
my pleasure, Tim.
Good luck with the show.
Thanks.